Is that him? What do you think makes one kind of tomatoes better than the other? This is the first video in a series about pizza sauce, and in this episode we'll be starting at the beginning. What tomatoes to buy for pizza sauce and why? Not just because I said so, rather you'll learn how to evaluate the tomatoes for yourself, and maybe you won't just blindly reach for a can of San Marzano tomatoes in the future. But with a full chapter on them later, you might just be buying them with even more confidence. Rolling with the food. I bought 10 cans of tomatoes and subjected them to rigorous scientific testing. I kept 4, but one of them really surprised me and seemed to be at the top of every category. First test is texture. Too much water content can affect your pizza's volume and overall texture in drastic ways. And it can be the cause of gum line, a gelatinous millimeter or two right under the sauce that can taste like uncooked dough. I bought some beakers and a conical sieve, or as they call it in France, a chinois. And I had all these plans to sieve the tomatoes out and measure the water underneath. The results were messy and ineffective, compared to just eyeballing the texture with the aid of a spoon, a technique for testing the consistency of sauces since the spoon. The results were somewhat predictable. The more expensive, the thicker. But there was another correlation. The country of origin. Italian tomatoes were thicker, with the Muti and Flora and Pastene being the thickest. The thinnest were the Publix, Whole Foods and Hunt's own brands. Old Bianco Napoli was somewhere in the middle. Now, thicker doesn't always equate to better. If you're using a much higher temp oven, something thinner might be in order. Then there's the question of flavor. Some tomatoes are heated to a lower temperature while cooking in what's referred to as a cold break process. This is done so that the tomatoes retain some more of the fresh, natural tomato flavor. The trade-off is the process doesn't kill off the enzymes that break down the pectin, leaving them to make it thicker. In other words, it's intentional, and these tomatoes are often ideal for Napolitano-style pizza. Next, I tested the acid and sweetness, the balance of the tomato. And I used a fully calibrated probe pH meter for the acid test and a 0 to 30 Brix refractometer to test the sweetness. Acid and sweetness are like two sides of the same coin. Whenever one's more prominent, the other is less so. Having the right amount of acidity without additives means the tomatoes were harvested at the right time and that nothing else needs to be added to ensure food safety, thereby telling you that the growers and processors give a shit about quality. We'll touch back on this at a later point in the video because it's a rather important aspect. And the results were thus. As you can see, the tomatoes with the citric acid in it were much lower acid, with all of the Italian ones being closer to that 4.5 range, and the sweetness was the same as well. Sweetness in any liquid is measured in what's called degrees Brix. Water is 0 Brix and pure glucose is 100 Brix. According to my research, which you can find on my website, over 4.5 degrees Brix is recommended for canned tomatoes. In the end, it boils down to personal taste. I personally like sweeter canned tomatoes with less acidity. And talking about citric acid, some processors that use citric acid in their tomatoes and adding it, while is a perfectly viable and naturalish ingredient, tells me only one thing. Either the tomatoes don't already have a balanced acidity, or they're just not picked at optimum times, where consequently they would do. Next is taste flavor. Whew. This is where the waters get a little bit muddy, subjective even. The way I tested for taste might be a bit flawed. I'll explain later. First, I'll show you the results. Boink! Some expected results and a couple of big surprises. The Publix own brand tasted like complete garbage. You could taste an awful chemical aftertaste, probably the calcium chloride. We'll get to that later. But my go-to tomatoes, there was a bit of a surprise. They were like in the mid to low estimation range, along with the other very expensive D.O.P tomatoes. And somehow, Hunt's tomatoes seem to taste quite fucking delicious with a frog blindfold on. And earlier I said that the testing was flawed, but that's not the full story. I was blind testing a product where some were seasoned and some were not. I was dipping something into them that had plenty of taste on its own, like salty, fatty, savory Detroit pizza. Anything with 0 salt in it is bound to get lost, and anything packed with salts and acids is going to stand out, which made the fact that the Muti tasted better than the majority quite impressive, considering that the only ingredients were tomato and tomato juice. Another one that stood out during taste testing were the Bianco di Napoli, despite them them being universally recommended on forums by them that pizza. I dismissed these tomatoes in the past, mainly due to the thinness of the juice, which is still thin. It's obvious to me now that these tomatoes are cold break process and are intended for use on higher temp ovens, wood-fired ovens. So I might be adding them to my usual list to give it a boost of that fresh flavor. And while we're on the subject of taste, we might as well talk about salt, because if you see salt added, it's not for curing the tomatoes, it's added for taste. Personally, given the option, I'm going to opt for them tomatoes without salt, because one, I'm quite capable of adding salt to my own shit, thank you. And two, what's wrong with your tomatoes if you need to boost the flavor before I've even dipped my fingers inside your can? Same goes for adding basil, but with the added fact that cooking basil at high temperatures required to can tomatoes kills most of the flavor and leaves you with these soggy green leaves in it. Blech. And another big no-no for me is calcium chloride, and it's not for health reasons. Have you met me? Have you met me? It's added to help the tomatoes retain their shape. What it really does is turn them into these solid, unnatural feeling orbs that are so dense that they make the jaw wobble and spin when you are blending them. I just don't like this shit at all, but you do you, baby boo. So my favorites after all the tests are the Muti. Only tomatoes on the ingredients list, are nice and thick, dense even, lovely flavor, non-GMO, blah, blah, blah. I highly recommend. The jury's still out on the Bianco for now, but I did like the way they tasted blind, despite not impressing in other areas. But what about my old go-tos? These used to be my go-tos, the Flora D.O.P. I'll still reach for these despite me under-evaluating them during the blind test again, but they are D.O.P. San Marzano. So fucking what? I hear you say, but hear me out. San Marzano on its own is a variety of tomato. It can be grown anywhere by anyone. But it does have some unique properties that lends itself well to making pizza sauce. They have longer bodies than most of the tomatoes, probably any other tomato. They have a higher flesh to seed ratio, which makes for a thicker liquid after processing. Then there's the taste. For me, this side of things range from nuanced to subjective, so we'll leave that part out of it for now. But those with the DOP designation have to be very specific species, San Marzano 2 or Kiros, with very strict regulations regarding how you have to grow, handle, harvest and process them, with a very short window at the end of the summer, the only time that you're allowed to hand pick them. And just like choosing when to harvest grapes for wine, this can make or break the quality of the fruit. They have to be matured enough for the acids and sugars to have balanced out before picking. At the beginning of the video, I asked you, what do you think makes one can of tomatoes better than the other? The answer is when it was harvested, which is kind of a trick question because harvesting window determines flavor, texture, pH levels, and sweetness, which are basically guaranteed when you see DOP on the label. These are really good. I like these, but they've got basil in them. Still very usable. Every other canner from everywhere else in the world can pick any size tomato any time of the year. That might be why in Chaboy Biancos, the tomatoes were ranged from the tiny little bollock to again, this is all a testament to how impressed I was with the Muti. It had all of the right criteria during testing. 4.5 acid bang on, a nice lovely 6.5 Sprix reading. And these growers, pickers and processors are not bound by any of those laws, so they obviously give a shit about the product. Maybe I'm just a culinary philistine. Who knows? If you haven't already, pick up a can, go and make some sauce with it, and then let me know whether you agree with me or not. Keep your eye on the channel for more videos in the series. We're going to do troubleshooting pizza sauce, how many different ways pizza sauce made around the country and globe, and one where I'll be testing all of the top pizza makers' pizza sauce with my frog blindfold on. Until then, check out my website, enterthedojo.com, for all the notes, references, and research I did to make this video, along with a page devoted to DOP San Marzano and the 8-page document that details what is required for certification. But thanks for watching. Peace out, motherfucker.